Perfect. So, hello. I'm Dave. I work in animal health and welfare advice, as Richard said. A number of you will know who I am and have met me before. And I'm going to run through sort of what, why, how, and who is the VRG, not necessarily in that order. I actually am the sort of secretariat, so principal organising member of the group. And this is, I guess, what we do. So, the veterinary risk group. I mean, I guess this is why the veterinary risk group is to start with. So we're sort of the idea of a sort of a group that systematically and timely assesses new and emerging issues comes from the Anderson Review, which is lessons learned of FMD 2007. And there's a very little tiny reference in the end of the annexes that says this kind of group is needed. And out of that, it comes out that this was put together. So we are sort of across anywhere and everywhere. Ideally, so cross-directorate, cross-administrative in government. We work on a monthly cycle, which I'll sort of elaborate on a bit later, and we report functionally to the CVOs, and then sort of more administratively and strategically to the Animal Disease Policy Group. We're allegedly a key tool, I think that's actually true, in how government manages new and emerging risks, and continues to be from our inception and deployment in 2011. So sorry if we're not quite new, as it were, and we do of course provide ideally systematically. And so this is the systematic bit comes from the use of the ITHIAS or ether, the emerging highlights threat report tool, which is a sort of semi-quantitative tool I'll talk a bit more in a minute. And we are fundamentally about supporting decision making, not actually making decisions. I know that sounds a bit internally governmenty thing to say, but we're in a sort of indirect advice. So the VRG is very much a technical group, so we're made up of vets and scientists from across government, as we'll see in a second, and we're about informing policy in ensuring that there's a clear communication around all of the information on things that are new and emerging. We are, of course, not just limited to animal health and welfare. We are as well, and you'll see, and I guess these sort of second points are a bit odd in a way, or the third point here, that the scope is broad, and it doesn't include business and resource things, but almost anything else we're happy to discuss and escalate and attempt to deal with. And although the examples I have are very focused around animal diseases, we deal with all sorts of other weird and wonderful things as well. And this slide also alludes to the fact that we deal with information in sort of two ways. So information that comes into us from all our sources, we try and categorize. And again, I'll talk about that in a little bit. So I guess moving on from what is the VRG to who is the VRG. And I'll usually apologize for this diagram, but I probably shouldn't, because it is actually a good summary of who and what we are. So the VRG is obviously cross-directorate, cross-administrative, and is made of sort of two layers of people. So if we start, I guess, with the most relevant one to this conversation, which would be the non-statutory surveillance on the far side, at, I guess, the sort of 9 o'clock position. And this is this outer layer in which SRU sort of feeds into us is called our risk leads. So these are the eyes and ears of the group, also sort of provide challenge on information that's coming up and into us. So you can see there that although they are represented by a single lead, the area obviously comprises all of the various expert groups that APHA has. And so if you look in that ring around there, that are our risk leads, so our singular point of contact into all these different areas, you can see they don't just cover things within APHA, so obviously zoonoses and One Health and all the way through to TB and the livestock information program. We're also linked into sort of the UK office and its various trade interests. And of course, then at the top there, you can see AMR surveillance. So that's actually obviously conducted and managed by the Veterinary Medicines Directorate, which leads us into that central circle quite well. So the central circle is made up of the sort of standing or the members of the VRG. So this is more policy focused essentially, and you can see in there's representation from the devolved administration, so that's the OCVO's office from Welsh Government, the VAs from Scottish Government, Northern Ireland, obviously, various DEFRA people. I've seen some of our DEFRA colleagues in the group today. We also link across, obviously, into the Food Standards Agency, and then, as I alluded to or said we connect into VMD, but so not just into AMR, but also into biologicals and VMD in a more wider area. And then obviously the other people who are sort of expected to be there as well are obviously the chair, who's the grade 6 or joint grade 6, I should say, of our area. Our vet lead. So this is an interesting role, I think, and quite unique to VRG. The vet lead is a sort of challenge function, but also a steer and support for the chair, in as much as that the VRG is very much about conversations and starting conversations, technical conversations between all of these different specialists. And so the vet lead there is kind of also there to stimulate stuff. And then there's me, the secretariat. So obviously I do this kind of stuff, the outreach and talking to people, but also there and to help people submit things and deal with the sort of incoming science and ensure that is robust. So I guess that's the sort of a brief overview of who we are and what we are. I alluded to earlier that the VRG deals with information in two sort of distinct ways. So that is as a threat. So this is why we have to be very, very clear in communicating what this is, because it's something very specific in terms of VRG nomenclature. So this is something that has severe impacts on the reasons for government intervention, is cross-cutting, has no leader, or has severe impacts. So when I say leader, I mean no clear policy owner, which is underlined there, and I should make that very clear. Or that there are reputational issues involved with that sort of risk, I guess, or emerging threat. And then the other way we deal with things is for points for information. So these could either be ongoing mitigated threats, or they could be out of the ordinary events, as I've got some examples going on. That it would be, or you know, things that are going on that would be useful for the wider audience that VRG has internally, or for the CVOs to be aware of. Yeah, when we think about contributions, lots of stuff in this sort of category comes from the APHA's International Disease Monitoring, because obviously there are lots of interesting changes in animal diseases across the world, not necessarily directly impacting us immediately. This slide is all of that text, but sort of transposed into a into a decision tree. It's just a really good way, I feel, of summarizing it, and I guess these the kind of slides will be more available to people. So it's just a good way of looking at it, basically. I'm very aware I've only got a few minutes left. I think I started at 5:02. So I'll also talk very quickly about our sort of threat characterization tool, the ether, and this is just a way of, like, as I say, systematically, sort of semi-quantitatively assessing things that are coming in. These aren't real scores, these are made up, and they are from various members of the VRG. So surveillance, obviously, exotic disease policy, and IDM just as placeholders. But you can see that we break things down into the impacts for government intervention and how severe those are, and those are all scored in sort of two dependent variables, and then how the public might perceive it. So how is this threat, or yeah, how is this threat going to be perceived in the media, to individuals, and as a in the government's response as a whole? And then we try and look at how the capability, so how well do we understand that this thing that is emerging, what resources do we have in place, and what legislative powers do we have to deal with it? And those scorings, essentially, in terms of impacts, we score 100 as being the worst and 0 as being no impact at all. And then in terms of capabilities, the more capability we have, the better. So yeah, no capability being bad, lots of capability being good. We've talked about who we are, how we do things, and then again, how we do things. The VRG works on a monthly cycle. So we are currently in the sort of 11 o'clock position, having reported to the CVOs. We are now coming back round, and this is our sort of the bit where our risk leads, I guess, are most active. So that is identifying what's going on in the world, what is interesting, what is new and emerging. As the sort of the end of the month comes up to the beginning of the month, we complete any ethers, so score things in terms of in the ether, and or put the documents together, ensure that we have robust evidence for everything. We have the meeting where we hash it out, I was going to say, but essentially have robust discussions around what is going on, what is the evidence we have, and how this impacts what we're going to be doing in the future. Those recommendations then taken to the CVOs and endorsed or not endorsed, and then taken forwards. Off the side of this, you can see ADPG. So ADPG is our sort of governance body. So that's the Animal Disease Policy Group, and we report to them annually. So they're sort of more oversight in a policy direction rather than more functional oversight that the CVAs have. In that monthly cycle, threats, so things that don't have any clear mitigation yet, will stay open, essentially, is what we're saying, until they are closed, until there is a satisfactory endpoint, somebody who can manage that risk. PFIs will be brought singularly, and there is a mechanism by which they can return. So you might have long-running series of PFIs on a developing issue or continuing actions under that issue. So just we've talked about those kind of things in the abstract. What are they specifically? And I realise I am coming to the end of my time. Severe clay Purkinje is something that emerged a number of years ago in the US, causing mass mortality events. It's sort of the classic example of a threat, because it's sort of unknown exactly what's going on. It has severe impacts on those various reasons of government intervention, and needs to have clear ownership. Salmonella in feeder animals. So this is something that was first raised a long time in the VRG and has been an ongoing saga in its development and dealing with, and was finally sort of closed off in 2022. But this is something where it's clearly owned by the FSA and or various zoonoses people, and so those ongoing actions were just being reported to the VRG because it is interesting. And then finally, something that I find I quite like, UC2 virus. I think it's fascinating. For those who are not aware, it's a flavinovirus with a killicoos vector, and sort of birds as its intermediate host, but it also has dead end hosts in mammals, so it is zoonotic. First detected in the UK in 2020, and that's where it came to the VRG, where we've actually got this now, or we have evidence that we have this now. And from different members of the VRG, it came in sort of different angles. And I think this is really good in highlighting the fact that the VRG considers information in different ways, and we are flexible in the way that we apply those labels, because it's not about the labels, it's about the conversation, ensuring that things are done. This slide is relatively relevant. Well, it's just sort of an illustration of the fact that the VRG has overall good engagement and is continuing to do its job.